The night began before Emily Carter was ready for it. It started with a small moment that felt unimportant at first. Emily stood in her kitchen, rinsing a coffee mug she had forgotten to wash earlier. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that comes from long familiarity. Please. Michael was already asleep. She could hear his steady breathing through the ceiling vents, calm and predictable. That sound had once made her feel safe. Tonight, it made her feel distant. She placed the mug on the rack and leaned against the counter. Her reflection in the dark window looked older than she felt inside. At 39, Emily had a good life by most standards. A stable marriage. A warm home in a quiet Portland neighborhood. A job she was respected for. Friends who trusted her. Nothing was broken. And yet, something felt unfinished. Her phone buzzed on the counter. Emily didn't need to look to know who it was from. Still, she hesitated before picking it up, as if touching the screen would change something she could no longer control. Daniel Lewis, I fly out tomorrow morning. I didn't want to leave without saying goodbye. The message was simple, polite, careful. Daniel was always careful. That was part of what made him dangerous to her heart. Emily set the phone face down and exhaled slowly. She wasn't surprised by the message. She had been expecting it all evening. What surprised her was how deeply it reached into her chest. She and Daniel had known each other years ago, long before Michael, long before her life became measured and settled. Back then, Emily was still learning who she was. Daniel had been part of that season, not a lover, not even a promise, but a presence that made her feel understood. Life had pulled them in different directions, and they had lost touch without any dramatic ending. Until 2 weeks ago, they had run into each other at a downtown cafe by accident. At least, that's what Emily told herself. Daniel was in town from Vancouver for a short consulting project. They recognized each other instantly, as if time had folded in on itself. Their first conversation lasted only 10 minutes, but it stayed. With Emily all day, then came coffee, then a walk by the river, then long talks about work, life, regrets, and the quiet disappointments people rarely say out loud. Nothing physical ever happened. Nothing crossed a clear line. And yet Emily knew she was standing close to an edge. She glanced at the stairs leading up to the bedroom. Michael had been tired that night. He'd kissed her forehead and said they'd talk in the morning about a small disagreement they never finished. He believed mornings fix things. Emily wasn't so sure anymore. She picked up her coat from the chair. The cold outside felt sharp and alive as soon as she stepped out. Snow dusted the sidewalks, untouched and clean. The street lights painted long shadows across the road. Emily walked without a clear plan, her boots crunching softly with each step. Her phone vibrated again. But she didn't check it. She thought about Michael. They had met in their late 20s. Michael was steady, thoughtful, and patient. He showed love through actions rather than words. He remembered dates, fixed broken hinges, kept their life organized. When Emily had doubts early in their marriage, she pushed them aside, telling herself that real love was built, not felt all the time, for years. That belief had carried her forward. But somewhere along the way, she had stopped sharing parts of herself. She became careful with her thoughts, quiet with her dreams. Not because Michael demanded it, but because it felt easier than explaining feelings she couldn't fully name. Daniel, without trying, had noticed. He asked questions Michael never thought to ask. He remembered details Emily forgot she had shared. He listened without rushing to solve anything. When Emily spoke to him, she felt present in a way she hadn't in a long time. That scared her. Emily turned a corner and found herself near the river. The water moved slowly, reflecting city lights in broken lines. She stood by the railing and finally looked at her phone. Another message from Daniel. No pressure. I just wanted you to know I'm thinking of you. Emily closed her eyes. She knew. She could meet him. They could talk one last time. She could tell herself it was harmless, that nothing would happen. But she also knew how easily words could become memories that refused to fade. This night wasn't about Daniel. It was about the choice she had been avoiding for years. Emily realized something as she watched the river move forward without hesitation. She had been waiting for someone else to decide for her. Michael, Daniel, time itself. But time had already done enough damage by staying silent. She turned away from the river and began walking back home. When she opened the front door, the warmth of the house wrapped around her. She hung her coat and stood still, listening. Was the same? The clock ticking? The soft hum of the heater? The framed photos along the hallway, vacations, birthdays? A life that looked complete from the outside. Emily sat at the kitchen table and rested her hands flat against the wood. She didn't go upstairs. Instead, she stayed there through the night, watching darkness slowly fade into early morning light. Thoughts came quickly now, without fear. She replayed moments she had ignored, conversations she had shortened, emotions she had buried to keep things easy. She wasn't unhappy with Michael, but she wasn't fully honest either. As dawn approached, Emily picked up her phone again. She typed a message to Daniel, erased it, then typed again. I'm grateful you came back into my life. Tonight helped me understand something important. I need to face my truth at home. She sent it before she could change her mind. Daniel replied. A few minutes later, I understand. Take care of yourself, Emily. No drama, no guilt. It's just clarity. Footsteps sounded upstairs. Michael came down in his work clothes, surprised to see her awake. Did you sleep? He asked. Emily shook her head. We need to talk. Something in her voice made him sit down immediately. She didn't mention Daniel right away. She spoke about herself first, about feeling distant, about missing parts of who she used to be, about wanting more honesty between them. Michael listened, his expression serious, concerned, open. When she finally spoke Daniel's name, she did, so calmly, without excuses. She told the truth without blaming anyone. The room felt heavy, but real. Outside, snow began to melt as the sun climbed higher. And though Emily didn't know what the future would hold, she knew this night had already changed everything. Emily sat at the kitchen table as the first rays of morning light seeped through the blinds, softening the edges of the room. The night had been long, quiet, and full of decisions that felt heavier than any she had faced before. Her heart still ached with questions, but it also carried a strange sense of relief. She had confronted the feelings she had buried for months, maybe years, and now, for the first time in a long time, clarity seemed possible. She wasn't hiding from herself anymore, and that mattered more than anything else. Michael appeared at the bottom of the stairs, yawning and rubbing his eyes. Seeing Emily awake in the early morning hours, sitting straight-backed and thoughtful, made him pause. There was a seriousness in her posture, a quiet weight that told him something had changed. He had always known Emily to be careful with her words, even with him, but today she radiated honesty in a way that startled him. Did you sleep? He asked, his voice soft, tentative. No, Emily admitted. She pushed her hands into her lap and looked directly at him. I couldn't. I needed to think about us. Her voice was calm, but it carried the intensity of someone who had carried a heavy secret and decided to lay it down. Michael hesitated, but then sat across from her, ready to listen, ready to face whatever she had to say. Emily began slowly, carefully choosing her words. She spoke about herself first, about how over the years she had stopped sharing parts of herself, how she had started to settle into routines that left her feeling safe but not fully alive. She described the subtle loneliness of a life lived mostly in predictability, the way love sometimes felt like habit rather than a living, breathing thing. Michael listened in silence, letting her speak without interruption. For once, he wasn't offering solutions, just presence. She told him about Daniel, but not as a confession meant to hurt. She spoke about him as a mirror, as someone who reminded her of who she had been before life became so orderly. Daniel had awakened a part of her that she thought was gone. He had made her remember her own voice, her own desires, and her own courage. Michael absorbed her words with careful thought. He didn't respond immediately because Emily didn't need an answer right away. She needed understanding. And slowly, he began to understand. The room was quiet except for the soft ticking of the clock and the occasional hum of the refrigerator. Emily's words painted memories and feelings, but she never slipped into blame. She spoke as though telling a story she had finally accepted as true. She explained that she hadn't sought Daniel out to escape, hadn't pursued something forbidden. He had merely reminded her that parts of herself were still alive, and that she owed it to herself and to their marriage to acknowledge that truth. Michael nodded slowly. He wasn't angry, he wasn't shocked, he was simply listening. The first waves of hurt passed, replaced by something harder to define: respect for her honesty. He asked questions, careful ones, seeking clarity rather than confrontation. Emily answered them as best she could, her own heart open but steady. They talked about what had been missing, about small misunderstandings that had grown quietly into distance, about emotions left unspoken for far too long. Hours passed like minutes. Sky brightened outside, the snow melting slowly along the sidewalks, glinting in the morning light. Emily felt lighter with every sentence spoken, with every truth placed carefully on the table between them. Michael reached across and took her hand. The touch wasn't about reassurance or about forgiveness. It was about connection. The reminder that even after long stretches of quiet or misunderstanding, two people could still reach for each other. When the conversation finally ended, Emily realized she had made a choice. She didn't have to choose Daniel over Michael, and she didn't have to deny her own needs to stay married. She chose both. In a sense, she chose to honor her marriage and to honor herself. That night she had faced her feelings without shame. That morning she had spoken her truth. Choosing both meant allowing love to exist in multiple forms: love for another, love for her partner, and love for herself. Later that day, Emily sat down to write a message to Daniel. She didn't sugarcoat it or apologize unnecessarily. She expressed gratitude instead. She told him that he had reminded her of what she had almost forgotten: her own voice, her own heart, her own courage. She admitted that she couldn't continue anything with him, not because of fear, but because she had responsibilities and commitments she was ready to honor. She sent the message and felt a strange sense of peace as the seconds ticked by. Daniel replied quickly, briefly, with understanding. No anger, no confusion, no demands. Just respect for the woman who had chosen to face her truth instead of hiding from it. Emily smiled softly at the response, feeling the weight of tension lift from her shoulders. The moment wasn't about endings or beginnings. It was about clarity, honesty, and maturity. It was about choosing integrity in a world that often rewarded avoidance. Michael watched Emily's small smile and felt a warmth in his chest he hadn't felt in years. He realized that love wasn't just about predictability or comfort. Love required courage, vulnerability, and risk. By telling the truth, Emily had invited him into the rawness of her heart. And he had responded not with anger, but with openness. That moment shifted something between them. It didn't fix every problem or answer every question, but it opened the door to a deeper connection. The rest of the day passed quietly. They moved through morning and afternoon with a new awareness of each other, speaking when necessary and enjoying the unspoken understanding that had finally emerged. There was laughter, too soft and easy, like the first signs of spring after a long winter. Emily realized that choosing both didn't mean chaos or secrecy. It meant acknowledging complexity while still holding on to love and respect. Evening came and Emily sat by the window once more, reflecting on the night and the morning that followed. She thought about Daniel, not with longing, but with appreciation. He'd been a mirror, a reminder, a catalyst. She thought about Michael, feeling Gratitude for his patience, his presence, and his willingness to listen without judgment. She thought about herself, finally seeing the woman who had been quiet for too long and the courage it had taken to speak. By the time the sky darkened, Emily understood something profound. Life wasn't about choosing a single path and sticking blindly to it. It was about navigating the intersections between love, desire, responsibility, and self-respect. Choosing both meant embracing complexity, holding space for truth, and allowing love to exist in multiple forms simultaneously. That night, Emily felt a deep, steady peace. She didn't know what the future would hold, and she didn't need to. She had chosen her truth. She had spoken her heart. She had honored her marriage and herself. And for the first time in a long while, she felt whole. Winter slowly gave way to spring, and Emily noticed the small changes in herself. A lighter step, a quieter mind, a more open heart. She and Michael rebuilt a rhythm that included honesty, vulnerability, and emotional presence. They laughed more freely, spoke more openly, and shared moments of quiet joy that felt richer than any routine they had maintained before. Emily understood that growth required courage, patience, and reflection. And that love required the same qualities. She never saw Daniel again in person, but she didn't need to. He had done what he was meant to remind her that life was bigger than comfort zones and old routines. He had awakened something she could carry forward into her own life, into her marriage, and into her understanding of herself by choosing both her marriage and her own truth. Emily discovered that love was not a zero-sum game. It could expand, deepen, and transform without diminishing anyone involved. She had learned that honesty could coexist with loyalty, and that self-respect could strengthen rather than threaten the bonds of love. As the seasons changed, Emily reflected on that night often. It became a turning point, a quiet story she carried in her heart. She didn't tell many people the details because the story wasn't about drama or scandal. It was about courage, about choice, and about the subtle power of speaking the truth when it mattered most. And every time she thought back, she felt gratitude for Daniel, for Michael, and most importantly for herself. That night, the night she chose both, became a cornerstone of her life. Not because it was dramatic, not because it was perfect, but because it was real. Because it honored love, honesty, and the courage to face the heart without fear. And in that quiet, lasting way, Emily knew she had finally begun to live fully, not just for others, but for herself.